At the Englisher Hof yesterday evening, I observed a man I have known for 20 years. He dined alone at his customary table, surrounded by every comfort his considerable wealth affords. His meal was impeccable, his wine from an excellent vintage, his clothing of the finest cut. Yet his face told a different story entirely. The same tension I observed 2 decades ago, when he possessed but a fraction of his current fortune, still resided there, merely redirected toward new objects of anxiety. This morning, walking along the Rhine, I encountered a laborer of modest means who greeted me with genuine equanimity. His circumstances are constrained by any material measure, yet his countenance showed none of that perpetual low-grade anguish that characterized the wealthy merchant. I do not romanticize poverty. It brings its own genuine sufferings. But I recognized in that moment a truth I have spent decades investigating, that peace bears no correlation to achievement, that satisfaction cannot be accumulated like thalers in a strong box, that the very mechanism of grasping prevents the peace men seek through grasping. If you have pursued your aims with diligence, if you have secured what you believed would finally bring rest, if you find yourself nonetheless unsatisfied, this work is written for you. What follows is not consolation, but clarity about why satisfaction perpetually eludes those who seek it through willing. I knew a merchant in Frankfurt, a man of considerable means, who had spent 3 decades in tireless accumulation. His warehouses groaned with goods, his accounts swelled with capital, his name commanded respect in every exchange from here to Hamburg. When at last he achieved his aim, sufficient wealth to retire in comfort, to cease his anxious calculations, to rest, I observed him closely. What I witnessed contradicts everything men believe about satisfaction and its attainment. Within weeks of securing his goal, new anxieties emerged, like weeds in untended soil. Fear of loss replaced fear of insufficiency. Concern about his son's management of the business consumed him more than the business itself ever had. Regret about missed opportunities, investments not made, connections not cultivated, gnawed at him with greater intensity than earlier ambitions. His face, which I had known for years, showed the same tension, the same furrowed concentration, merely redirected toward new objects. This is no accident of character or personal failing. It reveals the will's fundamental operation within consciousness. Watch carefully your own experience. Recall your last 3 significant achievements, objects you pursued with genuine conviction that their attainment would bring lasting peace. Perhaps a position you sought in your profession. Perhaps a purchase long anticipated. Perhaps recognition for work completed. Notice honestly how long satisfaction endured. Within that brief span, new desires emerged, new dissatisfactions presented themselves, new goals beckoned. The achievement delivered pleasure, certainly, but not the permanent contentment it promised. This pattern is not circumstantial, but essential. The will manifests in organic life as endless striving. It is the hunger that returns an hour after feeding, the thirst that renews itself after drinking, the ambition that sprouts new aims before old ones are accomplished. We imagine with that peculiar species of human folly that achieving our aims will finally satisfy this restless force. We are like those condemned souls in ancient myth who carry water in sieves, forever laboring, forever emptied, yet somehow believing the next journey will prove different. The problem is not which objects you choose to pursue. The problem is that pursuit itself cannot deliver what it promises. Until you observe this with such clarity that the observation itself transforms your relationship to desire, you will remain enslaved to a mechanism that cares nothing for your peace. Men suffer from desire's frustration. This is unavoidable, woven into the fabric of conscious existence. But observe more carefully. They suffer doubly, and the second suffering is entirely unnecessary. The first suffering derives from actual circumstance. Your carriage is delayed, your business transaction fails, your body aches from illness, your work goes unrecognized. These are life's inevitable pains, as certain as winter follows autumn. But the second suffering? Here lies the peculiar human capacity for self-torment. derives from demanding that these circumstances not exist. You suffer the actual delay, then suffer additionally from believing the delay should not occur. You endure the genuine pain of loss, then add to it outrage that loss should visit you. During my years in Berlin, I observed two colleagues face similar professional disappointments. Both failed to secure positions they had sought with equal diligence. The first raged against injustice. He exhausted himself with resentment, constructed elaborate narratives of conspiracy and unfairness, fell ill from bitter brooding. The second, and this is crucial, observed his disappointment with equanimity. He acknowledged the pain, attended to it cleanly, then proceeded with his remaining opportunities. Neither denied the loss. Both felt its sting. But only the first suffered twice. The mechanism operates thus. When you encounter frustration, notice what occurs in consciousness. First comes awareness of the actual circumstance. The position was offered to another. This is primary suffering, unavoidable. Then immediately follows a cascade of thoughts. This should not have happened. I deserve better. Life is unfair. Everything always goes wrong for me. Each of these thoughts is secondary suffering, generated not by circumstances, but by your mind's resistance to circumstances. Consider hunger between meals. You feel the genuine discomfort of an empty stomach. This is primary. If you accept that hunger naturally returns and must be satisfied at proper intervals, you suffer only this physical sensation. But if you believe hunger itself should not exist, that your body should not require such repeated attention, that needing food represents some failure or cosmic injustice, then you suffer the hunger plus your protest against hunger. You suffer twice when once would suffice. This distinction transforms immediately upon recognition. Energy previously consumed by futile resistance becomes available for clear response. You still experience pain, existence guarantees this, but you cease compounding it with unnecessary anguish. The burden lightens not through changed circumstances, but through changed relationship to circumstances. Walk into any lecture hall where wisdom is purported to be taught. Open any volume of moral philosophy. Attend any gathering where the learned discuss human improvement. What counsel will you receive? Invariably this: redirect your desires toward better objects. The moralists proclaim, cease pursuing wealth and pursue virtue instead. Abandon material goods for spiritual ones. Substitute noble aims for base ones. The religious authorities echo similar prescriptions, merely substituting heavenly rewards for earthly ones. Even the philosophers, those who should know better, offer the same essential advice. Your problem is not desiring itself, but desiring wrongly. Choose wisdom over pleasure, knowledge over wealth, duty over satisfaction. This changes nothing fundamental. It prescribes different fetters while leaving imprisonment unquestioned. I observed a colleague abandon pursuit of commercial success for pursuit of moral perfection, believing this transformation would deliver the peace that wealth could not. Yet his anxiety merely transferred its object. Instead of fearing poverty, he feared moral failure. Instead of grasping for gold, he grasped for righteousness. Instead of anxiously calculating profits, he anxiously measured his virtue against imagined standards. The object changed. The grasping did not. He remained enslaved to the will's mechanism, having merely exchanged one master for another who proved equally tyrannical. You see, the conventional wisdom accepts the will's dominance as natural and inevitable. It never questions the mechanism of desiring itself, only suggests redirecting desire's energy toward supposedly better channels. This is like prescribing different brands of chains to a prisoner. The fundamental condition imprisonment remains untouched. The alternative I propose is not better willing, but cessation of willing. Not through suppression, which intensifies desire, through resistance, but through understanding that dissolves identification with desire itself. When you grasp clearly that the will is not your personal faculty, but a cosmic force manifesting through your organism, When you observe desires arising without your consent and persisting despite your resistance, identification naturally weakens. This is not technique but consequence. Like releasing a hot coal not through effort but through recognizing it burns. The recognition itself produces release. The East has known this for millennia. The Upanishads speak of Maya, the veil of illusion that must be penetrated. The Buddha identified tanha, the thirst, the craving, as suffering source, and taught its cessation rather than its redirection. But these truths were obscured in mythology and religious practice. I offer them philosophically. Not faith, but understanding liberates. Not better objects, but recognition that no object ultimately satisfies. Until you grasp this distinction, you will continue exhausting yourself in the same futile project, merely substituting aims, while the suffering mechanism persists unchanged. Observe your own hand moving. You experience this movement as voluntary, I move my hand. I choose this action. I author this gesture. But examine the phenomenon more closely, with a precision a philosopher must bring to all observation. Where did the desire to move your hand originate? Did you consciously create it? Look carefully. The desire simply appeared in consciousness, already formed, already present. You did not decide to desire. You discovered the desire already there. The thought, move hand, arose spontaneously, and then mysteriously. Automatically, the hand moved. You witnessed both phenomena, but authored neither. This reveals something fundamental about what you are and what the will is. The will is not psychological faculty, not capacity for choice, not personal possession subject to your control. The will is metaphysical essence, the thing in itself underlying all existence, the innermost nature of reality that manifests through every living organism, including yours. Your desires do not originate from a separate self-choosing among possibilities. They are the universal will manifesting through this particular body's nervous system. Just as your heart beats without your volition, producing its rhythm according to biological necessity rather than conscious decision, so do your desires arise from forces deeper than conscious choice. You are not the author of your willing. You are the theater in which willing occurs. This is not mere speculation, but observable fact. During my daily walks along the Rhine, thoughts arise continuously about dinner, about my philosophical work, about news I read in the Times, about interactions from yesterday. I do not summon these thoughts. They appear like clouds appearing in skies spontaneously, without conscious instigation. The sensation, I am thinking these thoughts, is itself merely another thought arising in consciousness. When I look for the thinker apart from thinking, I find nothing, only the continuous flow of phenomena. Kant understood that we cannot know the thing in itself through representations, forms, through space, time, and causality which structure all external perception. But he failed to recognize what I have discovered. Through inner experience of our own volition, we access reality's essential nature directly. What we experience as individual will is the universal will temporarily manifested, localized, made conscious through this organism's particular structure. Recognizing this transforms your relationship to desire fundamentally. The desires continue arising, the body still hungers, ambitions still emerge, preferences still assert themselves, but you observe them differently. Not as my desires that define me, but as the will's movements through this nervous system. Like watching weather patterns rather than identifying yourself as the storm, this observation creates psychological distance from desire itself, the first movement toward liberation from its tyranny. I ask you now to perform an investigation that threatens the very foundation of how you experience existence. It requires courage, for what you discover may destabilize everything you have assumed about yourself. Yet this destabilization is prerequisite to genuine understanding. Look for the I that supposedly desires, chooses, and acts. Search carefully, with the same precision you would bring to finding a lost object. Where is this self that claims ownership of thoughts, that asserts authorship of desires, that imagines itself as permanent entity persisting through changing experiences? You will not find it. You will find thoughts, certainly. Sensations, perceptions, emotions, memories, these arise continuously in consciousness. But the permanent I that supposedly possesses them, this phantom vanishes upon examination. Consider, right now, a thought is present in your consciousness. Perhaps about these words you are reading, perhaps about your circumstances, perhaps planning tomorrow's activities. Where did this thought originate? Did you consciously create it, selecting it from infinite possibilities, shaping it deliberately? No, it simply appeared, already formed, already thinking itself. You discovered it present in awareness, but did not author it. Now look for the you who supposedly thought this thought. What do you find? Only another thought. I thought that thought. But this second thought is itself merely another phenomenon arising in consciousness, possessing the same spontaneous quality as the first. You have added nothing. You have simply observed two thoughts where previously you noticed one. The self is not entity, but fiction. What you experience as identity is merely pattern of phenomena coalescing temporarily, thoughts claiming continuity with previous thoughts, sensations referencing previous sensations, memories suggesting persistent experiencer. But this continuity is constructed, not discovered. It is narrative consciousness tells itself, not fact consciousness observes. This accords perfectly with Vedantic teaching about Atman and Brahman, with Buddhist doctrine of anatta non-self. But I present it not as religious doctrine requiring faith, but as philosophical observation available to direct investigation. Simply look. Look now. Look repeatedly. Each time you seek the separate self, you will find only its absence, only the flow of phenomena without permanent center. When the illusion of separate selfhood begins dissolving through direct observation, identification with desire weakens naturally. After all, who is there to possess desires? Who claims ownership of these movements, of will arising spontaneously in consciousness? The phantom cannot grasp. Only belief in the phantom creates the experience of grasping. This is most destabilizing recognition possible while consciousness persists. Yet it must be experienced directly, not merely accepted intellectually, before liberation becomes possible. A student once approached me with earnest inquiry, how do I practice letting go? What technique must I employ to achieve? Non-attachment? His sincerity was evident, his confusion equally so. I told him, you cannot practice letting go, for the very attempt creates new grasping. To practice letting go is to will against willing, to grasp after non-grasping. This produces only exhaustion, not liberation. He persisted as students do when answers fail to match their expectations. Then what should I do? If I cannot practice non-attachment, how shall I achieve it? I answered, you do not achieve it. You observe how willing operates until you see its futility so clearly that willing itself weakens. This is consequence, not technique. Release is what occurs when understanding penetrates sufficiently deep. This distinction is critical, yet nearly everyone misunderstands it. They hear letting go and immediately translate it into task, into project, into new object for the will to pursue. They begin attempting to let go, meditating toward non-attachment, practicing acceptance, cultivating equanimity, and wonder why these efforts produce more tension rather than release. They have missed the fundamental point entirely. Consider how you release something burning. When your hand touches hot iron, you do not accomplish release through technique or practice. The recognition that it burns causes automatic withdrawal. No decision occurs, no practice is necessary, no achievement is involved. Clear perception of the situation produces natural response without intervening will. Similarly with desire. When you observe desire's operation with sufficient clarity, watch it arise without your summoning, persist despite your resistance, dissolve without your permission. when you recognize it as the will's manifestation rather than your desire, identification naturally weakens, not because you achieve something, but because illusion dissolved through understanding. The practice, insofar as there is one, consists of pure observation without agenda. When desire arises strongly, resist the urge to either fulfill or suppress it. Instead, simply watch. What does this desire feel like physically? What thoughts accompany it? How does it change moment to moment? Notice yourself noticing it. This observation requires no doing, no achieving, no special state. You are simply attending to what already occurs. Over time, and here patience is essential, for the will does not surrender its dominion quickly, this clear seeing weakens identification more effectively than any technique, not because observation is method for eliminating desire, but because observation reveals desire's true nature, and recognition of true nature naturally produces different relationship to what is recognized. Attempting to force this process creates merely another form of willing. The exhausting project of trying to let go becomes new enslavement. Understanding this paradox is itself part of the understanding that eventually liberates. I guide you now through direct observation that transforms intellectual understanding into lived recognition. Not theory, but experience. Not belief, but evidence from your own consciousness. First station, the observation of insatiability. For the next 7 days, observe every significant satisfaction. After a proper meal, when genuine hunger has been addressed, note precisely when the comfortable fullness transitions to new hunger. After accomplishing a task that brought genuine sense of completion, mark when mind immediately begins cataloging the next task. After receiving praise that momentarily pleased you, notice when anxiety about maintaining reputation emerges. After purchasing something long anticipated, observe how quickly acquisition's pleasure fades into either taking the object for granted or desiring the next object. Track this with the precision a natural philosopher brings to experiments. You are investigating not abstract proposition, but actual mechanism operating within your consciousness. Most discover satisfaction, dissipates within hours, sometimes minutes. This is not failure of particular satisfactions, but demonstration of the will's structural insatiability. The hunger cycle reveals this most clearly. After eating, the body requires no food for several hours. Yet hunger inevitably returns, not because something went wrong, not because you ate poorly, but because the body must continuously seek. The satisfaction was real but temporary by nature. All desire operates identically. The merchant who achieves commercial success experiences genuine pleasure. But this pleasure cannot persist because the will must continue willing. It is the will's nature to strive endlessly, not to rest in satisfaction. Even during activities you enjoy, notice the tension between present state and desired completion. I once watched a painter absorbed in work he loved. He would claim painting brought him joy, and relatively speaking it did. Yet I observed tension in his shoulders, frustration when brush failed to match conception, anxiety about others' reception of the work. The pleasure was genuine, but coexisted with continuous low-grade suffering. The gap between vision and execution, between aspiration and achievement, between security and potential loss. This suffering is not obvious because we accept it as natural to striving. The scholar pursuing knowledge experiences it as the discomfort of not yet understanding. The craftsman experiences it as the dis-ease between imagined and actual work. The lover experiences it as fear of loss. We rarely identify these as suffering because they accompany pursuits we value. Yet they are suffering, nonetheless, the inevitable tension that accompanies all willing. Observe yourself during the next activity you genuinely enjoy. Notice the subtle striving, even within pleasure. This is not meant to eliminate enjoyment, but to reveal what accompanies all willing, even willing toward objects we deem worthy. Until you observe this directly in your own experience, my words remain merely theory. When you verify it repeatedly through careful attention, Understanding shifts from intellectual assent to experiential recognition. This shift changes everything. Whenever strong emotion arises, anger, fear, desire, pride, immediately perform this investigation. Look for the one experiencing this emotion. Do not theorize. Do not remember what you have read. Simply look directly. You will find the emotion itself, the physical sensations, the associated thoughts, the affective quality. But where is the experiencer separate from the experience? Where is the I that supposedly possesses this anger rather than the anger simply occurring? When you look carefully, the subject-object division collapses. There is anger, but no angry one. There is fear, but no frightened self. There is thinking, but no thinker, apart from thoughts. This investigation must be repeated persistently, for the illusion of selfhood reasserts itself automatically. Thought creates the sense of I continuously, like a river creating waves continuously. You must look again and again until the seeing becomes natural, until you recognize automatically that what you call self is merely pattern of phenomena rather than entity. The Vedantist asked, "Who am I?" and pursued the question relentlessly. Every answer, "I am a merchant, I am a father, I am this body, I am this mind," reveals itself as temporary role or phenomena rather than essential identity. Continue asking until no answer remains, until the question itself dissolves, because its premise that there is someone to be identified proves false. Fourth station, the recognition of unity. Paradoxically, dissolution of separate selfhood produces not isolation, but profound connection. When you recognize the will's operation in yourself, the blind striving, the insatiable hunger, the continuous suffering inherent in willing, you simultaneously recognize this in all being. Yesterday, observing a draft horse straining beneath its load in Frankfurt streets, I recognized immediately the same blind will driving that animal's labor drives my philosophical ambitions. The distinction between human and beast, between my suffering and the horse's suffering, revealed itself as phenomenal only an artifact of representation's forms. In essence, one will manifests through all, indifferent to the particular form of its manifestation. When someone frustrates you through their anxious striving or selfish behavior, pause, observe. They are manifesting the same. Will that drives your own desires? Their grasping differs from yours only in its object, not in its essential nature. The merchant who cheats in our transaction, the servant who neglects her duties, the colleague who criticizes unjustly, all are driven by this same force, all suffer the same fundamental condition, all mistake the same temporary phenomena for permanent satisfaction. This recognition does not excuse harmful actions. Social consequences must still apply to maintain civil order. But it dissolves personal resentment. How can I resent what is identical to myself? How can I claim moral superiority when the same mechanism operates through this organism as through that one? This is compassion in its deepest sense, not sentimental sympathy that maintains separation between helper and help, but metaphysical recognition that the distinction between self and other is illusory. When I help another, I help myself, for we are not truly separate. When another suffers, I witness my own suffering in different form. This understanding must become visceral, not merely intellectual. Then it transforms how you move through the world. Last evening, I attended the opera. As Mozart's composition began, I felt the familiar movement of consciousness away from its ordinary state. The anxieties that had accompanied me into the theater, concerns about my work, frustration from the day's interactions, anticipations about tomorrow, gradually dissolved. Time suspended, self dissolved. There remained only pure perception meeting pure form. For those moments, the will ceased its tyranny completely. No desires troubled consciousness. No future beckoned, no past required attention. I was neither Arthur Schopenhauer with his particular history, nor an individual with separate interests. I became pure subject, perceiving pure object, will-less knowing, consciousness liberated temporarily from the endless mechanism of wanting. This is what art accomplishes when experienced fully. Not entertainment, not distraction, but genuine suspension of willing, the landscape that captures your complete attention, the music that absorbs you utterly, the poem that stops thought. These provide glimpses of what existence might be if the will did not dominate consciousness. They demonstrate that liberation is possible, even if temporarily. Cultivate regular opportunities for such suspension, not as another task on your list of improvements, but as practical necessity. Daily walks observing nature without analyzing or categorizing. Weekly attendance at concerts, releasing fully into sound without commentary. Time with visual art, allowing pure perception without relating everything to personal concerns. During these moments, practice dropping self-consciousness. When you notice yourself noticing, simply return to direct perception. When you catch yourself analyzing your experience of beauty, release the analysis and return to beauty itself. These glimpses refresh consciousness. More importantly, they instruct. They show you directly what lies beyond willing, what becomes possible when identification with desire weakens. They are not the goal, but evidence that the goal exists. Sixth station, the position of resignation. Finally, we arrive at the furthest point consciousness can reach while embodied life. Continues. Resignation to existence's essential character without resistance. Not bitter resignation born of defeat, the exhausted surrender of one who has fought and lost, but clear-eyed acceptance of what cannot be changed. You continued daily activities, your profession, your relationships, your necessary obligations, but you engage with them differently. The quality shifts from desperate investment to simple engagement. You work not because work will deliver lasting satisfaction, but because work is what this organism does in these circumstances. You maintain relationships not because they will finally complete you, but because connection is how consciousness manifests in social beings. You pursue aims not because achieving them matters ultimately, but because pursuit is what the will does through you, and you have ceased resisting this. This is not passivity. You may act with great vigor and competence, but internally you remain free. Failure does not devastate it. Outcomes arrive and depart. Like weather, you note them, respond practically, then proceed to whatever circumstances next require. Begin practicing equanimity with small outcomes. When daily plans fail, observe your reaction. Notice the impulse toward frustration, the mind's immediate story about why this should not have happened. Do not suppress these reactions, but do not indulge them either. Observe them as you would observe clouds passing. Then attend to what the changed circumstances actually require. Gradually, this capacity for equanimity extends to larger outcomes, not through achieving some superhuman detachment, but through repeated recognition that resisting what already exists only compounds suffering without changing what exists. This is the final station. Not transcendent ecstasy, not permanent bliss, not mystical union. These are delusions that optimists peddle. Simply this: clear perception of existence's nature, engagement with what is, internal freedom from desperate grasping. It is enough. It must be enough. His competence is recognized throughout the city. His services are sought by families of considerable means. His professional success is undeniable. Yet when you observe him carefully, you notice something distinct from other successful men. When cases are lost, he shows practical concern about proper documentation and lessons to be learned, but never the personal distress that afflicts those who mistake professional outcomes for existential stakes. When clients prove difficult or unreasonable, he manages them with skill, but without the resentment that consumes others who take such behaviors as personal affronts. When competitors secure contracts he sought, he notes this factually and adjusts his approach, but without the anxious comparison that exhausts those who measure their worth through relative standing. Walking beside him through the Rummerberg on market days, one senses an absence of that perpetual low-grade anxiety that characterizes most faces in the crowd. He moves through his professional life with full engagement, but without internal enslavement to its outcomes. This is how wisdom manifests in daily work, not through withdrawal or diminished effort, but through transformed relationship to activity itself. The key distinction is between necessity and ego. Which parts of your work serve genuine requirements, providing for your household, fulfilling legitimate obligations, contributing useful services, and which parts serve ego's desperate need for validation? The merchant must conduct business to sustain himself. But does he need to be the wealthiest merchant to validate his worth? The scholar must produce work to fulfill his position. But must he achieve greater fame than his colleagues to justify his existence? Most professional anxiety derives not from the work itself, but from what we demand the work prove about us. We require success to demonstrate our superiority, recognition to confirm our value, advancement to validate our existence. When work becomes theater for ego's performances, every outcome carries existential weight. Failure does not simply mean a task went undone. It means I am insufficient. Success does not simply mean a goal was reached. It means I am superior. The wise man performs his role with full competence, but without this identification. He is like an actor who delivers his lines skillfully while never confusing himself with the character. The work continues, perhaps improves, for anxiety impedes performance while equanimity enhances it, but it no longer defines his internal state. Examine your current profession or primary activities. During which moments do you experience simple engagement with present requirements, and during which moments do you experience anxious grasping after particular outcomes? The first is work. The second is the will-seeking, validation through work. Learn to distinguish them. Then gradually withdraw internal investment from the latter while maintaining full competence in the former. This requires practice, but the practice is observation, not achievement. Notice when you work from anxiety versus engagement. Notice what outcomes you are desperately attached to. Notice how this attachment affects both your experience and your effectiveness. The noticing itself, sustained over time, naturally produces transformation. Last winter, an illness confined me to bed for several weeks. The body's discomfort was considerable fever, weakness, various pains that accompany such conditions. Yet as I lay there, I observed something instructive about suffering's dual nature. There was the physical distress itself, the sensations in the body, unavoidable and considerable. But then I noticed something else. My mind's elaborate protest against these sensations. This should not be happening. I have work to complete. This is intolerable. When will it end? Others do not suffer such prolonged illness. This is unfair. This cascade of thoughts, I realized, produced its own suffering entirely distinct from the body's pain. When I ceased the mental protest, simply attended to the body's actual sensations, without adding narrative about why they should not exist, the suffering halved immediately. The physical discomfort remained, but the additional anguish generated by resistance vanished. This distinction between primary and secondary suffering is not theoretical, but immediately applicable. Primary suffering derives from circumstances themselves. The broken bone hurts, the loss of wealth constrains, the body ages, death approaches. These are existence's inevitable pains, as certain as gravity. But secondary suffering, this you generate through resistance to what already exists. Consider your last significant frustration. Perhaps your carriage was delayed, causing you to miss an appointment. What was the irreducible circumstance? You stood waiting, time passed, the appointment was missed. This is primary, the actual situation. Now observe what you added. This is intolerable. The driver is incompetent. Everything always goes wrong. I planned carefully, and still this happens. Life is against me. Each of these thoughts is secondary suffering your story about why the circumstance should not exist even though it does exist. The primary you must endure. The secondary you create through demanding reality differ from what it is. Yet observe carefully which produce more distress. Often the secondary far exceeds the primary, The actual inconvenience of waiting was minor. The outrage at having to wait was exhausting. Here is the practice. Next time you experience any form of suffering, physical pain, emotional distress, circumstantial difficulty, immediately identify these two components. What is the actual sensation or circumstance? What am I adding through resistance? For example, headache is primary. I can't believe this is happening again. Nothing ever goes right. This ruins my entire day. Is secondary. Experience the headache cleanly, without elaboration. Notice how much of what you call suffering was actually your resistance to the primary experience. This does not mean never expressing pain or maintaining stoic silence. The teaching addresses internal relationship to pain, not whether to communicate it externally. You can inform the physician about symptoms, while internally accepting that symptoms exist. You can work to change painful circumstances while accepting that currently these circumstances are actual. The energy you previously spent resisting unchangeable circumstances becomes available for actual response when you cease resistance. You suffer what must be suffered clearly, directly, without unnecessary elaboration. The burden does not vanish, but it lightens considerably. I observe daily a woman in my neighborhood who cannot release her adult children to their own development. Though they are grown, established in their own households, she intervenes continuously in their decisions. She manipulates their circumstances, orchestrates their social connections, lives in perpetual anxiety about their welfare. When they make choices, she disapproves. She suffers intensely, not from their actual suffering, for often they suffer very little, but from the deviation between their choices and her vision of how their lives should unfold. Her love is genuine. She wants their happiness. Yet her love has become instrument of suffering for all parties. She exhausts herself through attempts to control what cannot be controlled. They feel simultaneously loved and suffocated, cared for and manipulated. The relationship that should bring comfort brings tension instead. The alternative is not indifference or withdrawal. It is love that recognizes the beloved as separate center of experience, whose path must be their own. This is harder than control, for it means bearing witness to suffering you cannot prevent while remaining present. The wise father offers guidance when genuinely requested, then allows his children their own mistakes. He does not withhold wisdom, but neither does he impose it where unwanted. When his daughter chooses a suitor he considers unworthy, he may state his concerns if asked, then releases her to learn from her own experience. This requires immense strength, the strength to watch potential pain unfold without interfering, to care deeply without controlling outcomes, to remain present without directing choices. In your own relationships, examine this carefully. When do you help from genuine response to actual requests? And when do you intervene from your own inability to tolerate others' struggles? When do you offer presence without agenda? And when do you demand particular responses as price of your love? When do you support choices you would not make yourself? And when do you withdraw that support because others refuse to live according to your vision? The distinction is subtle but crucial. Genuine assistance responds to what the other actually needs. As they define their needs, control imposes what you believe they need, according to your preferences. Love offers freedom. Possession demands conformity. Care remains present through difficulty. Manipulation requires particular outcomes as condition of continued presence. Practice this. In your closest relationships, notice when you attempt to control versus when you genuinely support. Notice when you listen without planning solutions versus when you immediately begin directing outcomes. Notice when you observe others' paths with interest and compassion versus when you desperately invest in particular results. When someone you love struggles, distinguish. What assistance have they actually requested? What am I imposing from my own discomfort with their struggle? Often you discover that your help serves primarily to relieve your own anxiety rather than address their actual needs. This recognition produces freer, deeper relationships. Others feel the freedom you offer and often respond with greater openness than when you grasp desperately at connection. You love more fully because you no longer require specific responses. The relationship becomes genuine exchange rather than attempt to shape another into form that satisfies your requirements. This is not technique, but consequence of recognizing that all beings are the will's manifestations, that controlling another is as impossible as controlling yourself, that genuine care means allowing others their own relationship to existence rather than demanding they mirror yours. Men ask continuously, what is life's meaning? What is my purpose? Why am I here? They assume these questions have answers, that existence serves some aim beyond its own continuation, that consciousness should discover rather than create significance. This assumption produces immense unnecessary suffering. The will wills blindly, without purpose or direction. It is not moving toward any goal. It simply moves because movement is its nature, like the Rhine flowing not to reach the ocean, but simply because rivers flow. The will strives not to achieve satisfaction, but simply because striving is what it does. Therefore, the question, what is life's meaning, rests on false premise. Existence does not serve purpose beyond its own manifestation. This is not nihilism in the sense commonly meant, not despair at meaning's absence, not justification for destructive behavior. It is liberation from the exhausting project of seeking cosmic significance where none exists. The universe is not indifferent to human purposes. This implies awareness followed by a deliberate disregard. The universe has no awareness of human purposes whatsoever. Mountains do not care whether you climb them. Rivers do not care whether you ford them. Stars do not care whether you observe them. Your ambitions, achievements, and failures carry no more cosmic weight than the beetles I observe now on my writing desk, industriously pursuing some purpose comprehensible perhaps to itself, perhaps not even to itself. This recognition produces peculiar relief. You are not required to justify your existence. Your activities need not serve ultimate purpose. You are free to engage fully with life while abandoning the demand that this engagement carry metaphysical significance. Consider, you work at your profession not because this work matters cosmically, but because work is what conscious organisms in your circumstances do. You maintain relationships not because connection serves some universal plan, but because humans are social beings and connection is how consciousness manifests in social context. You pursue aims not because achieving them validates your existence, but because pursuit is what the will does through you. And you have ceased demanding that this serve higher purpose. Distinguishing meaningless from worthless is crucial here. Lack of cosmic significance does not imply lack of value. Your relationship with your child matters to you, to your child, to those affected by your interaction, but it does not matter to existence itself, which proceeds indifferently regardless of whether you fulfill your role well or poorly. This distinction liberates rather than diminishes. You are free to care deeply about what occurs within your sphere of influence while abandoning the exhausting pretense that these local concerns carry universal weight. When you find yourself demanding meaning or purpose from existence, recognize this as the will attempting to justify its own operations. The question, what's the point, assumes there should be a point. But why should there be? Existence simply is. Consciousness arises within it. The will manifests through consciousness. Suffering follows from this manifestation. No purpose, no plan, no ultimate justification. This is not tragedy, but simple fact. You can work diligently, love deeply, create beauty, pursue knowledge, all without requiring cosmic validation for doing so. The river flows not because flowing serves some purpose, but because flowing is what rivers do. You act not because your actions matter absolutely, but because action is what living consciousness does. This recognition does not prevent sincere engagement. It prevents demanding that engagement serve impossible aims. During the revolutions of 1848, I watched from my window as democratic idealists fought in the streets for justice and natural rights concepts they imagined existence owed them. When Austrian soldiers suppressed the rebellion with violence, I offered them my opera glasses, not from political sympathy, but from metaphysical understanding. Existence owes nothing to anyone's notions of fairness. The will manifests through all organisms with equal indifference to their character. The wicked often prosper. The virtuous often suffer. You observe this daily if you attend honestly to the world's actual operations. The merchant who cheats secures greater wealth than the honest tradesman. The ambitious schemer achieves recognition, while the sincere scholar labors in obscurity. The cruel frequently enjoy health and longevity, while the compassionate sicken and die young. Those who demand justice from existence have fundamentally misunderstood its nature. Suffering is not punishment. Prosperity is not reward. Both are merely phenomena arising from the will's blind operations, distributed according to physical causation rather than moral desert. The universe is not unjust. To be unjust requires capacity for justice, some awareness of moral categories, and deliberate violation of them. The universe is simply amoral, operating according to laws of physics and biology without regard to human notions of what should be. This recognition dissolves personal resentment while leaving social ethics appropriately intact. When another prospers despite vice, you understand this reveals nothing about cosmic justice, only that circumstances favored their particular manifestation of will. When you suffer despite virtue, you recognize this as existence's fundamental indifference to moral categories rather than as personal affront requiring outrage. Yet this does not eliminate need for social consequences. Ethical behavior remains necessary for communal functioning, just not for cosmic reasons. We maintain laws against theft not because the universe cares about property rights, but because social order requires predictable constraints on behavior. We punish harmful actions not to restore cosmic justice, but to protect individuals from each other. The framework shifts from metaphysical to practical. More importantly, when you recognize that all beings suffer the same fundamental condition, enslaved to the will's blind striving, mistaking temporary phenomena for permanent satisfaction, how can you maintain personal resentment? The merchant who cheats you, the servant who neglects duties, the colleague who criticizes unjustly, all are driven by the same force that drives you. Their vice differs from your vice only in its particular manifestation, not in its essential nature. This is compassion in its deepest form, not sentimental pity that implies superiority. Poor creature, I shall help them, but recognition of actual identity beneath phenomenal distinction. When you harm another, you harm yourself, for the separation is illusory. When another suffers, you witness the same suffering that operates through your own organism in different circumstances. Observe your reactions to perceived injustice over the next week. When the wicked prosper or the virtuous suffer, notice your impulse toward outrage. This outrage demands fairness from something incapable of fairness. It exhausts your energy without changing circumstances. Instead, respond practically. Work against injustice where possible, not because the universe owes justice, but because reducing suffering is how compassion manifests in action. But cease demanding cosmic fairness that cannot exist. The energy you previously spent in resentment becomes available for actual response. Personal bitterness dissolves not through achieving justice, but through recognizing that justice is human category imposed on amoral existence. You continue working for fair social arrangements while abandoning the delusion that existence itself operates according to moral principles. In my Frankfurt rooms, I maintain routines established over decades. Each morning I wash with cold water. No hot water is piped to these chambers, and I have never felt the need for such luxury. I walk 2 hours daily, regardless of weather, observing the Rhine's flow and the city's operations. Evenings I read by oil lamp until fatigue commands rest. These activities continue unchanged in their external form. What has transformed completely is their internal quality. I perform them without desperate investment in outcomes, without identifying my essential being with their success or failure. I am as one already dead who continues existing from habit rather than attachment, who engages with life's requirements, but without the anxious grasping that characterizes those who believe they truly possess something to lose. This is Jivan Mukti, the Vedantic concept of liberation, while still embodied. Not escape from existence, which is impossible while consciousness persists, but liberation from existence's tyranny over consciousness. You continue daily activities, but as witness rather than victim, observer rather than prisoner. This is the furthest point consciousness can reach while life continues. Consider death that ultimate negation toward which all life moves inevitably. The man who has not grasped these truths faces death with terror. He imagines something is being taken from him, that his projects remain incomplete, that meaning is being stolen. But you who have followed this teaching to its conclusion recognize individual existence as temporary manifestation of will. You have already loosened identification with this particular organism. Death becomes not enemy, but natural conclusion. The wave returning to ocean, the phenomenon dissolving back into thing in itself. Living as one already dead means remembering daily. This body will cease. Today's activities, whatever their outcomes, matter no more ultimately than the beetle's activities on my desk. The beetle proceeds with such apparent seriousness, such evident purpose, yet carries no cosmic significance whatsoever. We are that beetle, elevated by consciousness to tragic awareness of our condition, but not exempted from it. This recognition humbles without humiliating, contextualizes without diminishing. Begin each day with this awareness. Sit for 5 minutes recognizing this organism will cease. Death comes regardless of what I achieve or fail to achieve today. Whatever I accomplish will dissolve. Whatever I possess will be lost. Whatever I become will end. Notice how this recognition affects your engagement with the day. Does it produce despair? If so, you have not yet grasped the teaching fully. When properly understood, it produces not despair, but peculiar vigor, the freedom of having nothing to lose because you recognize you never possessed anything. You engage fully with life, while remaining internally free from its vicissitudes. You work not because work will deliver lasting satisfaction, but because work is what this organism does in these circumstances. You love not because love will complete you, but because connection is how consciousness manifests. You suffer not because suffering requires cosmic justification, but because suffering is inherent in conscious existence. And you do all this without demanding it be otherwise, without resisting what already exists, without believing your preferences matter to existence itself. This is sufficient. It must be sufficient. No transcendent ecstasy awaits, no permanent bliss, no mystical union with the Absolute. These are delusions the optimists peddle to those still desperate for consolation. Only this: clear perception of existence's nature, engagement with what is, internal freedom from desperate grasping while life continues its brief manifestation. I offer no guarantee of comfort. The man who sees clearly often sees what others mercifully remain blind to: existence's essential meaninglessness, individual striving's futility, death's inevitable victory over all purposes. But he also experiences freedom unavailable to those still enslaved by grasping. Having nothing to lose, he moves through life more freely than those burdened by attachments. Having abandoned hope of permanent satisfaction, he suffers each inevitable disappointment less acutely. The work is complete. What remains is only your own practice, your own observation, your own transformation or continued enslavement. I can compel nothing. I have offered clear perception of existence's essential character, and whatever peace such clarity brings when one ceases fighting against the immutable. Whether you accept what has been demonstrated, whether consciousness undergoes the transformation from identification with willing to observation of willing, this remains your own affair entirely.